If there's no emergency funding this year, there will be 1 out of 3 farmers will file bankruptcy.
In years past, growing commodities the way we're growing them now has been profitable, and that's not the case anymore. Right now, every commodity in Arkansas is losing money on every single acre, and that's not sustainable for farmers.
Did mention that China has been boycotting American soybeans, and American farmers have really suffered.
The farming market in Arkansas has entered a period of sudden and destabilizing collapse, sending shockwaves through rural communities, supply chains, and political leadership across the state. For generations, agriculture has formed the backbone of Arkansas's economy, sustaining small towns, regional employment, and food production, networks that stretch across the USA. Now, a convergence of economic pressure, environmental stress, and market disruption has pushed that foundation to a breaking point. Crops that once guaranteed predictable income are failing to turn a profit. Livestock operations are shrinking under rising costs, and farmers who plan their futures around stability are confronting an uncertain and alarming reality. At the center of the crisis is a dramatic imbalance between production costs and market prices. Fuel, fertilizer, seed, equipment maintenance, and transportation expenses have surged, while the prices paid to farmers have stagnated or dropped outright. Many Arkansas producers report selling harvests at prices below their cost of production, forcing them to operate at a loss simply to stay in business. This pattern has drained reserves, maxed out credit lines, and left farms with little room to absorb further shocks. As losses accumulate, foreclosures and forced land sales are becoming more common, accelerating the erosion of family-owned operations that once defined the rural landscape. Weather volatility has compounded these financial pressures. Unpredictable rainfall patterns, prolonged heat, and sudden storms have damaged yields and reduced quality across multiple growing seasons. Arkansas farmers, already operating on thin margins, find themselves unable to recover from repeated climate-related setbacks. Crop insurance has not kept pace with the scale of losses, and payout delays have further strained cash flow. The result is a growing sense that traditional risk management tools no longer offer sufficient protection in an increasingly unstable environment. Supply chain disruptions have also played a decisive role in the collapse. Processing facilities, distributors, and transport networks have struggled with labor shortages and rising operational costs. When bottlenecks occur, Arkansas farmers are often left with perishable goods that cannot reach market in time. Crops rot in storage, livestock must be held longer at additional expense, and contracts are broken without adequate compensation. These failures ripple outward, weakening trust between producers and buyers and discouraging future investment in agricultural infrastructure. As the crisis deepens, rural communities are bearing the social consequences. Farm closures mean lost jobs not only on the land but also in related industries such as equipment repair, feed, supply, and local retail. Small towns that rely on agricultural income are seeing declining tax bases, school funding challenges, and reduced access to healthcare services. Younger generations, witnessing the instability firsthand, are increasingly reluctant to remain in farming, accelerating population decline and hollowing out entire regions of the state. Against this backdrop, the governor of Arkansas has been thrust into a state of visible urgency. Public statements have shifted from cautious optimism to stark warnings about the future of the state's agricultural economy. Emergency meetings with advisors, industry representatives, and federal officials underscore the gravity of the situation. The administration faces mounting pressure to act decisively, yet the available options are constrained by budget limitations, political realities, and the scale of the collapse itself. Proposed responses include state-level financial relief, temporary tax adjustments, and appeals for federal assistance from the USA. However, many farmers argue that short-term aid will not address the structural problems driving the collapse. They point to consolidation in agribusiness, pricing power concentrated far from Arkansas, and trade dynamics that leave local producers vulnerable to global market swings. Without reforms that strengthen farmer bargaining power and stabilize income, emergency measures risk becoming little more than a delay of inevitable outcomes. The sense of panic surrounding the governor of Arkansas is fueled not only by economic data but by the political stakes involved. Agriculture remains a powerful symbol of self-reliance and identity within the state. A failure to halt the collapse could redefine public perception of leadership and competence. Rural voters, traditionally loyal, are voicing frustration and anger, demanding accountability and tangible results rather than reassurances. protests, town hall confrontations, and increasingly blunt rhetoric reflect a widening gap between policy promises and lived experience. Meanwhile, financial institutions are tightening lending standards for agricultural borrowers, further accelerating the downturn. As risk assessments worsen, farmers find it harder to secure operating loans needed to plant the next season's crops. This creates a vicious cycle in which lack of financing leads to reduced production, which in turn weakens markets and reinforces lender caution. The collapse feeds on itself, spreading from individual farms to entire regions of Arkansas. The broader implications extend beyond state borders. Arkansas plays a significant role in national food production, and sustained disruption threatens supply stability across the USA. Reduced output can contribute to higher consumer prices, increased reliance on imports, and heightened vulnerability to external shocks. What began as a regional crisis now carries national significance, drawing attention from policymakers and analysts concerned about food security and rural resilience. As the situation unfolds, uncertainty dominates every conversation. Farmers weigh whether to plant another season or walk away. Communities question whether recovery is possible or if decline has become permanent. The governor of Arkansas confronts the challenge of restoring confidence while navigating a crisis with no easy solutions. The collapse of the Arkansas farming market is no longer a distant warning. It is a present reality reshaping lives, economies, and the political landscape in ways that will be felt for years to come. The collapse of the Arkansas farming market continues to unfold with increasing intensity, revealing deeper structural weaknesses that had been masked during years of relative stability. What once appeared to be temporary strain has evolved into a systemic breakdown, exposing how dependent the state's agricultural sector has become on fragile economic assumptions. For decades, growth was sustained by expansion, debt, and the expectation that global demand would always absorb local production. That expectation has now shattered, leaving Arkansas farmers caught between shrinking markets and unrelenting costs. One of the most damaging forces accelerating the collapse is the imbalance of power between producers and buyers. Large purchasing entities, many operating far beyond Arkansas, dictate prices with little regard for local conditions. Farmers are often locked into contracts that shift risk downward while protecting corporate margins. When markets soften or logistics fail, producers absorb the losses. In Arkansas, this has meant entire harvests sold at prices that barely cover transportation, let alone labor or land costs. The sense of exploitation has intensified resentment and despair across farming communities. Land values, once a source of security, have become another point of instability. As profitability declines, farmland is losing value in many regions of Arkansas. This erosion undermines collateral for loans, triggering reassessments by lenders, and forcing some farmers into early repayment or refinancing under harsher terms. Those unable to comply face foreclosure, a process that not only removes livelihoods but also fractures communities. Fields that once symbolized continuity and heritage now stand as reminders of vulnerability and loss. The emotional toll of the collapse is as severe as the financial one. Farming in Arkansas has never been merely an occupation. It has been a way of life deeply tied to identity and pride. As operations fail, many experience a profound sense of personal failure, even though the causes life are beyond individual control. Stress, anxiety, and isolation are rising, with limited access to mental health resources in rural areas. The social fabric that once offered mutual support is strained as neighbors face similar struggles and lack the capacity to help one another. State-level interventions have so far struggled to match the scale of the crisis. Emergency declarations and task forces signal recognition of the problem, yet implementation lags behind urgency. Bureaucratic processes slow the delivery of aid, and eligibility requirements exclude many who are already on the edge. In Arkansas, frustration is growing as farmers perceive a disconnect between public statements and tangible relief. The governor of Arkansas faces mounting criticism for failing to anticipate the collapse and for responding too cautiously once warning signs became undeniable. Federal involvement from the USA has introduced additional complexity. While national programs exist to support agriculture, they are often designed for short-term disruptions, rather than prolonged market failure. Applications are dense, approvals slow, and funding insufficient relative to demand. Arkansas farmers competing with producers from other states find themselves disadvantaged when assistance is spread thinly across a vast system. This fuels the perception that rural Arkansas is being overlooked in favor of larger, more politically influential regions. Transportation and export challenges further undermine recovery prospects. Rising fuel prices and reduced shipping capacity make it increasingly expensive to move goods beyond state borders. For Arkansas producers reliant on external markets, this translates into shrinking margins or complete loss of competitiveness. International trade uncertainties add another layer of risk, as fluctuating tariffs and foreign demand can erase profitability overnight. The farming market, once anchored in predictability, now feels subject to forces entirely beyond local influence. The collapse is also reshaping land use across Arkansas as traditional farming becomes untenable. Some land is being repurposed or abandoned. Large investors acquire distressed properties, consolidating acreage and shifting production models away from community-based farming. This transformation alters the rural landscape, reducing employment opportunities and concentrating control in fewer hands. While consolidation may improve efficiency on paper, it deepens social inequality and erodes the independence that once defined Arkansas agriculture. Political tension continues to rise as the consequences of inaction become more visible. Rural voters are increasingly vocal, organizing meetings and demonstrations to demand stronger measures. The governor of Arkansas is under pressure to balance fiscal responsibility with the moral imperative to protect the state's agricultural foundation. Every decision carries risk, whether it involves reallocating funds, challenging powerful market actors, or appealing for expanded federal support from the USA. Education and workforce development are also affected by the collapse. As farms close, young people see fewer reasons to pursue agricultural careers. Training programs lose relevance, schools face declining enrollment, and the knowledge base that sustained Arkansas farming for generations begins to erode. This loss of human capital threatens long-term recovery, as fewer individuals possess the skills and experience needed to rebuild a resilient agricultural sector. The uncertainty surrounding the future of farming in Arkansas has created a climate of fear and speculation. Some hope that market corrections or policy shifts will eventually restore balance, while others believe the collapse marks a permanent turning point. What is clear is that incremental adjustments are no longer sufficient. The crisis demands a fundamental rethinking of how agriculture is valued, supported, and integrated into the broader economy of the USA. As pressure mounts, the governor of Arkansas confronts a narrowing window for decisive action. Delays risk cementing decline, while bold moves carry political and economic consequences. The collapse of the Arkansas farming market has evolved from a sector-specific issue into a defining challenge for the state's leadership, its communities, and its future role within national food systems. The next phase will determine whether Arkansas adapts and survives or becomes a cautionary example of neglect in the face of systemic change.